In almost all cases, especially with people anticipating we're going to run into a recession here on the backside of this, everybody's reevaluating. Dollars are tight. I've spoken to a number of companies. Yeah, we're not sure what we're doing right now. So we're not going to do anything for the meantime until we start figuring out what's happening.
Right. We work with a lot of different sales tech vendors and MarTech vendors, and they're telling us that they have never seen so many CFOs, CIOs, CROs intervening at the end of the sales process lately, at the end of this last quarter, and in some cases, completely punting, completely pausing, or having this extra hurdle at the end to decide whether or not this is actually something we should be working on.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was Dan Gottlieb. Dan's a senior analyst for TOPO, a sales and marketing advisory firm that is now part of Gartner. And today, he's joining me on this episode of Sales Enablement to talk about TOPO's recommendations for how you should adjust your sales messaging for the COVID-19 era. It all starts with developing a true understanding of what customers are going through now and capturing that juxtaposition between the roles and goals before and after the COVID-19 work-from-home policies went into place. We'll dig into why your messaging during this time requires nuance, empathy, insights, and value. Now, before we get to Dan, I want to let you know that all of us who work to produce this podcast are incredibly grateful for all the healthcare professionals on the front lines of this battle against COVID-19. If there's one thing that each of us can do to help them in this fight, it is to do everything we can to reduce the number of new cases that come to the hospitals. Now, I have cabin fever just like everyone else, so when you go outside, wear a mask, be considerate of others. Remember, we're all in this fight together. All right, let's jump into it. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. So, where are you sheltering?
I am sheltered in San Francisco, in the city, about 3 blocks away from Golden Gate Park.
Now, do you get out to the park and walk these days, or staying inside?
I do brave the outdoors as on a beautiful sunshiny afternoon sometimes. I do an excellent job of keeping my distance, walking in the middle of the field, not on the sidewalk. So I just need that vitamin D sometimes and a breath of fresh air. I will say those are my favorite parts of my day sometimes.
Yeah. So I've been inside for almost 2 weeks now, other than a grocery run to Trader Joe's 2 weeks ago. But I think we're going again tomorrow because the Mother's Hubbard cupboard is getting pretty bare. Yeah, it's one of these days I really wish I had a balcony.
Yeah.
You know, it's unfortunately in our building there are no balconies or terraces, as they say here in New York. So yeah, but the streets are empty. I don't know what the city, San Francisco, the city over here, it's empty.
My wife will go. So one of the city community college buildings is just right on the other block, and it's completely empty. And my wife will take a lounge chair, it's like one of those just classic camp chairs, and she'll just go sit outside on the sidewalk and read. Sometimes mask on, like full on, just like full on, like just to not be inside. Sometimes on a beautiful afternoon.
Yeah, I think I'm on my third.
That's our balcony.
Yeah, I think I'm on my third iteration of masks. I'm trying to decide what to wear when I go out. Yeah, I've got the bandana. Now they say the bandanas are no good, and ordered some face masks, some other things. It's like, whatever.
It's a new wave of fashion, right? Maybe that can be the next thing that we go into.
Well, but here's the
next wave of fashion.
Right. And you may be right, though. But here's the thing. Think about it. So I was having this conversation with somebody else this morning. Okay, they say it's okay. Fly again. Would you? But if you do, would you think, well, yeah, maybe I should mask up. Maybe I should glove up. Right? I mean, how long is it going to have to take till we all feel comfortable to go out in public without that?
I definitely think I'm going to be rethinking, do I have to travel for this half-day workshop for this event? I mean, from a cult, I think you're going to see a lot of people. It's going to be a lot harder. The more cavalier folk, the folks that had a hard time staying inside anyways, they're going to be ready to plow right back outside, right? They're going to be But I think a lot of us, even just like standing next to people in line at the grocery store, I think that's going to be an adjustment. Like, are we ready to get a yard apart, let alone, right next to each other?
Well, I mean, you've lived in New York, so you're familiar with what I'm about to say is, my wife and I were out for a walk a couple weeks ago and, being very conscious about social distancing. And we're even not really even together. She's just a few feet behind me off to my right. And we're just sort of walking. And this young woman, we're going past the entrance to an apartment building. And as you in New York, people just plow out of the apartment buildings, right? No one looks at the oncoming traffic. You just jump out into traffic. And she was very lightly traveled at that time, just my wife and I. But she comes out and turns and sees us, and she literally jumps in the air. And it was like, oh, yeah, things have really changed. It's just like, I find myself when I'm on the sidewalk, people walk by, I turn my back on them.
Totally. My wife and I, when we go on a walk sometimes, she'll be like James Bond with her back against the garage door, down the street just to make sure that she's staying away from 6 foot. And, at first I thought to myself, how ridiculous is that? But then I realized this is what's required,
Oh, it is what's required. Absolutely.
This is what's required. And I have to get over me. Like I had a moment where I was like, my insecurity is the reason I'm not staying apart from people. So I immediately put my back against the garage door and was like, well, I'm with you. This is what we got. This is what we do now.
We step out into the streets. I mean, and so the other sort of New York oddity I was laughing about again a couple weeks ago we were out is in Manhattan for sure is in front of every business there's the metal grates that cover the steps going down to the basement, and everybody's accustomed to walking over those things, and people steer around them when they're walking. So you think you have 6 feet on somebody, but they walk into your lane so they can go around those things because they're afraid of falling down into the basement. Not that anyone ever has, other than somebody in a cartoon sometime, but yeah, we're all adjusting. So anyway, well, we're going to talk about how to adjust your sales messaging for this era, or if not this era, for let's say how we define this era is this, during the crisis as well as post-crisis. What does that look like? What do you need to do? So I guess that was the first question is is era really the right term? It's like maybe,
right.
maybe
how long is an era?
right.
How do I get through this month? Is I think one of the first questions. We got to start much more immediate, but I think that the safe way to look at it is how do I message? How do I create engagement in this environment?
Mm-hmm.
And that's I think the question a lot of sellers are trying to figure out the answers to right now. And, everyone has changed. Their life has changed in some way, shape, or form. The degree of which of impact of that is going to be different across the, where you are in society, both geographically, socially, economically. It's going to vary based on the kind of work that you do. That feels like a duh, but, I saw a funny meme. It said there's only 4 kinds of employees now. There's the mega rich, the Zoom users, the frontline heroes, and the unemployed, right? And that freakily resonated.
It really does. Yeah.
Right. That freakily resonated. So that's I think it's all about making sure you understand what you're really trying to do here, right? And for us, it's about helping our clients understand that your goal is now to engage in a relevant way in order to figure out if there's any way you might ever be able to possibly sell, right?
And I think that's a perfect summation of it, right? I think that there's too much within sales of sort of this residual, macho bro. Hey, go out and pound calls, just pound calls. We still got to pound calls, and it's like, no, that's really tone deaf in so many ways. And I understand you're playing to a certain audience, but the fact is to your point, is that the first thing you have to do is understand understand where the customer sits. Because there's very few businesses, unless they're investing to support the transition to work from home, in almost all cases, especially with people anticipating we're going to run into a recession here on the backside of this, is everybody's reevaluating. Dollars are tight. Companies, I've spoken to a number of companies. Yeah, we're not sure what we're doing right now, so we're not going to do anything for the meantime until we start figuring out what's happening.
Right. we've seen several clients. We work with a lot of different sales tech vendors and MarTech vendors, and they're telling us that they have never seen so many CFOs, CIOs, CROs intervening at the end of the sales process lately, at the end of this last quarter, and in some cases, completely punting, completely pausing, or having to, this extra hurdle at the end to decide whether or not this is actually something we should be working on right now. So yeah, that's just a tiny little snapshot of what's changing.
Yeah, and I think even with those people think that they've got something that needs to be fixed is in a strategy that I recommend, but you see companies doing anyway. It's like, yeah, look, we were going to put in an order, it's going to be for 100 seats. Nah, we really need 10 right now. There's this 10 that are really crucial. Let's do the 10. We're going to defer the rest.
Exactly. Yeah.
But if you don't engage in the right way up front, you're going to lose that opportunity. So you talk you've given me some material about this, is about really going through this exercise, which I think is really useful, of creating that messaging. Because I think a lot of times I'm somebody who's written books and sort of writes for a living with a blog and so on, is if you want to clarify your thinking and you want to be able to say, okay, does this look right? Does it sound right? Is you put it down on paper.
And exactly. And there's this unspoken reality amongst a lot of sellers right now where they're just uncomfortable with the tools they have and the training that they have approaching and selling the way that they're used to. I mean, they're just, it's just discomfort, awkwardness. I don't want to do this right now. And they're experiencing that, especially inside sales teams that are used to doing this in bullpens. They get energy from each other.
Right.
They're now at home by themselves having to experience this, right? I think every seller's had that day.
Oh, yeah. And they're having to be, to a point you bring up when you talk about doing this exercise, is they're having to, have a level of empathy that, quite frankly, they've never had to show before. And it's key. And we talk about empathy a lot in sales. It's a cliche and a lip service more than anything. Most people think that if they're given a persona by marketing of their client, they understand that person, therefore have empathy for them, which they don't. But we're in this unique we're in this unique situation though, where if you understand that empathy is really about understanding why someone feels the way they do, you've never had more common ground with somebody than at any other time in your life. The opportunity to engage as a human, which we don't train people on, to engage on a human level with somebody, because you have this shared experience. Everybody's at home.
Yeah, I would love to get into the content in a second, but it reminds me the word that comes to mind is that it's this egalitarian experience, and what it's turning into. What it's totally turning into right now is, I'll never forget when I lived in Brooklyn, New York. New York is not the kind of place where you smile and high five and ask every single neighbor of yours how they're doing. You just have too many of them to figure that out. Right. And so I'll never forget. It was a blizzard. Maybe it was 2015, 2016. And my roommate was like, I'm going to go shelter this out with my girlfriend. And I was by myself. And I was like, I don't want to do this by myself. So I called my buddy who lived all the way up in Greenpoint. And I was in Williamsburg. And he said, come on over. We're here hanging out. Please come on over. And it was starting to get bad. So I said, I'm just going to strap up my stuff and I'm going to go hike 1.5 miles in the snowstorm to my friend's house. And I will never forget how every single person I saw, we were waving to each other. We were talking to each other. We were like, how crazy is this? I had never had an experience like that except for in New York City ever. And I don't think I'll ever have it again, where I stop and acknowledge every single neighbor that I saw. And in many ways, this is a global phenomenon of the same proportion.
Yeah. And so I think this is the thing that really sort of struck me is say, okay, if we're going to put together our messaging strategy, it has to start with that. You make this human connection. And so when you start saying, okay, well, how am I addressing this person? It's like, well, gosh, you have all these questions that come to mind. If you have grade school age kids, how's the online education going? You're getting homework done, or projects getting done. You can just start from a laundry list of things that will lead into a conversation about business, but people want to relate on that level to begin with. And it's not something that will necessarily go away. It should not go away once we sort of start passing through into whatever we consider the new normal to be or the new reality to be. Hopefully it's a massive lesson for sellers.
Completely. One thing that's very important for a lot of sellers that might be listening to this or paying attention to this is that you shouldn't go at this all by yourself. There's a lot of things you can control within an organization. How do you figure out what the relevant topics are about your buyers? Historically, we've relied on buyer persona messaging. Historically, we've relied on our product marketing team to give us insights. Sometimes we rely on our personal experience and what we know about our market. Sometimes we're practitioners before we went into sales.
Right.
And the profession that I think is the most important for sellers to try and emulate right now is journalists. Start with your relationships. Just start with experts that you know, people that you know in your market that can just tell you, here's what I got going on. And then as an organization, behave like a newsroom, setting up channels in your internal Slack or Teams or whatever you use, where you're literally just providing these real-time updates and creating this like self-building library of insights where all you're doing is just getting that knowledge out as quickly as you can. And then once you have, you can validate, right? Hey, look, like I've been talking, if we're reaching out net cold to a prospect, a stranger you've never heard of before, you don't want to use empathy along the lines of my family is safe. Of course you hope my family is safe. I hope you would not hope that my family is safe. You can kind of skip towards the more of that business oriented. Hey, look, like I understand you might be going through having to think about how to completely re-instrument your team for the next 3 to 6 months, or that you might be considering whether or not you should bring your team back to the office. Like you can use the insights to have a much more relevant conversation. So we've been telling a lot of our sellers and our clients that we work with that to think about engagement first, like engagement over discovery, if you will, just to start a conversation. And then from there, you can learn a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah. And make sure I understood you correctly. I mean, I would not skip the small talk on about the things that are personal, ever. Because I think first of all, it's going to give the personal level of comfort with you when you then make the transition to say, oh, okay, this guy's kind of interested in me, and I'm therefore interested in him or her. So yeah, I'm more likely to answer more fully on this next question. And we tend to, there's this trend, and hopefully, we'll see it stop here, but there's been this trend to sort of say, let's dismiss that small talk part at the first. And I think the way sellers have to understand what happens is that everything builds on the thing that preceded it in sales. And so somebody may still talk to you, even though you didn't necessarily do the greatest job at that personal engagement level. They may still talk to you, but there's a lot of reasons people may still talk to you. What you don't understand is you're on a weaker foundation and maybe you're in third place. So you really have to pay attention to everything at each step along the way. And so engagement starts, absolutely. Start the personal, get to business. Not that you spend forever. No one has an interest spending 20 minutes talking about homework with the kids, but find that thing. If you do a little work ahead of time, you'll know.
Completely. And there is so much X factor in whether or not someone has kids, where those kids are in life, whether they're at home or not, and I think it's been very interesting to watch the folks that are at home with young kids find an escape through work. I have a colleague, they're an account manager, and they're on the East Coast and some of us are on the West Coast, and we're like, Matt, isn't it like 8:00 there? He's like, yes, but this is a very important call right now.
Well, my stepdaughter's a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and so they're doing sessions remotely, and we're in the office. The mother will sit in the waiting room, and the kid will come in and spend time. And now the mother sets them down and says, "See you later." They're out of there for an hour, just you occupy this kid because they've been all over me for the last 8 hours. So yeah, this is very interesting. And so I don't envy people who have school-age kids that are home, or even preschool kids that are trying to get all this work done. It's amazing that they are able to get it done, because I remember those days, and yeah, would have been tough. So, all right, so we're talking about engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about understanding the person's goals that you're talking to. So, what do you think about that?
So, that's always been a high level vague idea that I think every seller has been told in one way or 45 shapes or forms throughout their careers, right? The key is understanding and trying to get to a point where you can have a much more thoughtful conversation about what's shifted. A lot of organizations, what they care about has completely changed over the next, your 2020 plan, the model that you use, all of the assumptions that you made for your plan this year, they're all out the window. They're all busted. There is no opportunity conversion benchmark during a pandemic that exists. So, as a result of that, I think it's been fascinating to watch how quickly organizations can get to this point of understanding what are the actual imperatives, not just to survive the next month, but how has this business, what are the next 3 to 6 months going to look like?
Right.
What kind of change management is coming downhill from there? We've been talking about how if you're going to get a deal done, really the only way you're going to get a deal done is if you're connecting the value of what you're providing to one of those mission critical priorities, and that you find the person that's been deputized to address that. And so understanding how to ask those questions early has never been more important, both from helping the person that you're talking with understand if this is worth their time, and to make sure that you're honing in on the thing that matters.
What do you have suggestions on how to ask that?
Yeah, so the suggestions, if you have information from some of your past customers, that's probably one of the most useful ways, right? Like we've seen a few businesses that are trying to change the way that they're thinking about instrumenting their teams, right? Is that relevant? Yeah, no, not. Rather than just asking these kind of questions in a flat, open-ended, trying to demonstrate that, hey, I've been trying to figure this out, and I'm trying to figure out what's relevant to you. Building on the idea, like you said a minute ago, that everything happens based on what happened before, right? So the more journalist-like presentation of insights from what you've been seeing from your customers, and the more relevant they are, the better. The more likely you're going to be to learn, well, no, that's interesting. That company is trying to think about it like that, but here's how we've been deputized to figure this out, right? We need to create, if you're selling sales tech to a sales team,
Yeah, that was the interesting part. I might layer it slightly differently in the way I'd ask, because instead of referencing that, hey, we've been talking to a lot of customers and this is sort of what they're seeing, I would start by trying to include them in the effort and saying, we're in the process of talking to our customers to try to understand what's going on and what's important. What are you seeing? And then they'll say, da, 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 da. And then you say, well, that's interesting because we've been talking to this company, and this is what they've seen. Then you can engage that in. But I think it's more engaging for them to say, I want your opinion first. Not that I talk to these other people. Now, what do you think? But
I love that. It's the spirit of the entire concept is you're collaborating with them on ideas, and you're bringing to the table is the insights from your team, that newsroom,
right?
And I love that. That's a great optimization.
And another way to sort of think about it too for people that are listening is to think about when you say that, and they sort of come back with with this sort of what we're seeing, is there's two types of questions I believe to ask that are sort of macro and micro. The macro level is, well, it's interesting. So what's the impact going to be on your company of this? And then what's the impact going to be on you of this? Because when you get to the you level, then you open the door to find, well, maybe it's not me that's really the impact. You really need to talk to Nancy over in the other department. She's the one that's really going to be carrying the water on this. Oh, okay. now go to Nancy. Or if it is this person, then they start opening up and saying, well, yeah, it's interesting because, yeah, I'm really trying to figure that out right now. Geez, how can I help you with that?
It resonates in that it is a highly more collaborative approach to the initial conversation, right? Or than just working with and identifying like where is this, what has your next 3 to 6 months shifted to be like? And if those, when we're thinking about this idea of adding value, you have to focus on extreme value. And that's going to be the way that you do that, is by honing in on like only the things that are going to be both relevant to this person and it's got to be the one thing. You can't paint this huge, big, ideal, vision for all the things you're going to change, because that's just not true.
Yeah. Well, but I think the thing that it's really interesting you brought that up, because this is a lesson for people listening, is that, Dan just talked about, you have to identify that one thing. The point is, there's always only just one thing. Not just now, forever, right?
Right.
And if this helps you get better at finding that one thing that's of extreme value, then this is a great exercise to go through to help you do that. Because, I share the example of early in my career selling this good-sized computer system to a company in Fairfield, California, big construction company out in the Bay Area, East Bay. And they ran us through the ringer on this thing. Boy, we RFPs and big compliance matrices, and we had to demonstrate. It was for accounting for a good-sized construction company. And we had to demonstrate all the modules, AR, AP, payroll, billing, job cost accounting, blah, 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 blah. And it was exhausting. We ultimately won. And I remember it finally dawned on me a few months after they had started implementing it, and maybe 6 months in, they were pretty fully implemented. At least I thought it was. I go out, and they're only running one module. I said, it was a billing module. I said, Frank, what's going on here? And he said, well, this is why we wanted to buy it. The rest was nice. This was our one thing. And this has happened to me.
And they were really happy.
Oh, they were extremely happy. And
they were extremely happy, yeah.
And this happened to me numerous times in my career before I finally got smart enough to say, okay, what's the one thing? And so I think in this era, you highlighted perfectly, which is there is one thing that's more important than all the others. Find that one thing and find the one person who, to your point earlier as well, who's responsible for that one thing. And then you can start having those conversations.
Yeah. We call that person the deputy.
The deputy. Okay. I like that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's just, that is the key. Like I said, whether it's now or whenever, when you're selling, is you discover you have to find that one thing.
It's exciting, right? And big picture in that, this is accelerating these practices becoming norm. I think we've been talking about this for a long time in sales anyways. But there's a whole generation of us, myself very much included, we've all been selling and learning how to sell in this gluttonous period of extreme growth,
Lucky
and you. I know. Lucky us. Very lucky us. But now in a month, the stakes have completely changed. And as a result, this idea isn't just a nice to have idea. It's going to be the only way you're able to make it through. But there's this really big nuanced change that's happening at the front. And it's this idea of, we've been taught about give gets, right? Qualifying. Discovery is treated as this like tips and tricks kind of experience. Every seller thinks they're sly foxes when they're like, so tell me a little bit about who else is involved in the buying process.
I know.
The jig is up on this, and that we have to be willing to give and give and give without expecting much in return in order to learn about the one big thing. Right. I have an example. We have a client. They are they talk about Tricky, right? They sell software to healthcare systems, specifically collections optimization. Talk about Tricky.
Yeah, talk about Tricky, yes.
And so essentially they've basically like paused a lot of selling right now, but they are only focusing on turning their sellers into like value add resources around. They've literally turned them into journalists. And the only thing that they're even meeting with these folks on are sharing like mini assessment templates that they can use to figure out whether or not they actually need to think about their collections process differently for post-COVID, you know? And so that's an example. They're just giving. There's no expectation of getting anything in return. And I think that's going to be really hard from a messaging standpoint for a lot of sellers to understand, right? Because it's so counterintuitive to what has been espoused.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of taking, as you're talking, it sort of struck me as, it's like, you have to look at more of your opportunities, even if you're a little more transactional. You have to look at more of your opportunities like major accounts, where what you're doing is you're investing the time to help them. And this is an area of focus, I think, that's going to be difficult for some sellers, is to help them, and you brought this word up, is help them decide, not decide, but choose how they want to solve the problem that they've got. And unfortunately, we tend to train sellers these days. If you look at decision making in 2 steps, is people first choose how they want to solve the problem. Second, they then decide who they want to solve it with. Is we orient our training and our focus and our processes oftentimes on helping our sellers just try to focus on that decide part. After the customer's already sort of chosen how they want to solve it. And if you're on the outside looking in when the customer says, well, this is we're going to define, this is how we're going to define how we want to solve this problem, then you're in a tough spot. You just compete on price and delivery at that point. And so what you were talking about before really is this, you have this opportunity now, especially if somebody's paused something that was in the works, especially if you weren't really in the running before, is to come back in and say, how can we help you solve this problem? Let's look at what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Have you maybe thought about this? You provide your insights to a little bit of challenger. And if you can be that person that says, look, they're going to ultimately end up basing their vision of what they're going to buy based on what our solution is, then you've turned that into a winning position.
Yes. And what I love about it is how you're, turning it into a winning position, and how you use the relationship that you establish to do that, even if it's transactional. Adding extreme value doesn't have to be the one thing, like that big issue. It doesn't have to be honing in on that one issue. You could start in a much simpler way.
Sure.
I got an example, a sales enablement technology vendor, right? Sales enablement's very busy right now, as a team, very busy. But one of that group's big issues, I've got worldwide training sessions that we got to now run virtually. And we've got to figure out not only how to adjust COVID, to the post-COVID economy, we also have to find out how to deliver this virtually to a sales force of 500 plus people. And by the way, we have to help with QBRs, right? All while all this is going on. And so, they're just giving their sales reps this tool to how to run a virtual QBR. So they're just reaching out to enablement people saying like, hey, you trying to run let me just set up some time to show you how to do that. You could start small to get the engagement. You're creating reasons, but this requires sellers to be dynamic, right? Dynamic enough to deliver that kind of a presentation and not ask for anything in return. Disciplined enough to focus on helping and not asking for anything in return. And that's extremely counterintuitive. But the information comes up. It's impossible for it not to come up, right? When you're helping along those lines.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the difficulty I think that we see in these days, though, and because it's a difficulty that exists prior to this COVID crisis, is the situation you described. The biggest barrier to make that happen is management. Because
tell me more about that.
Well, because and these are, my opinions and observations through, 787 episodes of the show and talking to hundreds and hundreds of people and companies, is that, one of the artifacts of the way that we bring technology into sales is that we really haven't trained people how to use the data in the most efficient, effective way. And so, if you try to bring a nuanced sales approach into what is oftentimes, especially in the SaaS environment, kind of a brute force sales management ethos, there's going to be a conflict. And so, this is going to be a challenge for companies, and is a challenge for these companies real time now. Companies are dealing with this. Yeah, how do I manage this need to be more value based? Be, quite frankly, is accept the fact that my customers are they're slowing down. That's why the recession is going to hit, because everybody's slowing down in turn, right? It's sort of unavoidable. Mm-hmm. So how do you work with your sellers as a manager that wants to hit your number? Company needs to hit a number, whatever that number's undoubtedly changed in the last month, but you still have a number you want to hit. Is how do you mesh these two together? And I think, messaging to the customer notwithstanding, is this becomes really one of the big issues, because you got people remote. To your point earlier, they're not in the bullpen where they get the group effort and the group think and the esprit de corps and camaraderie and sharing of best practices. All that stuff's much more difficult now and harder.
To bring this full circle, what you just said resonates deeply for a few reasons. So the first one is that, we think about, and this is this dramatic. We're not just being hyperbolic. We were talking about this, in the as we were getting warmed up for the recording here. We were
doing
talking
our vocal exercises,
right?
Yeah.
During our yes. I was a theater kid, by the way, so that
me too.
Big black bug bled blue blood. Amazing.
Red leather, yellow leather. Yes,
makes sense. Red leather, yellow leather. That's a classic.
Yeah.
That's an absolute classic. I still sometimes do that before speaking engagements and trainings and whatnot. Anyways, so as we were finishing our exercises, we were talking about reinvention, and reinvention is org wide. It's everywhere. It's in process. It's in individuals. It's in our management strategy. And unfortunately, but leaders are asking themselves, is this the right group, right? Is this the right group of people that I need to lead right now? And I think that's going to be it's a really tough reality for sales managers in that regard. But the second reason why it resonates is that, there's this growing wave in sales tech and sales anyways that was happening before this. It's just going to accelerate it. And that was the culture of sales has been evolving because sales tech has been creating unprecedented transparency. You think about a forecast, historically, it was very subjective. Here's my commit. Here's where I'm at. What happened in the last meeting? Well, let me tell you what happened in the last meeting. Well, that subjectivity that would go into the forecast would come back down. Well, I think that you're able to go find X much more. I think you're able to go figure this out. So just go figure it out. That has been, and I think every seller can think of an experience that they've had like that, right? That right there is a lot of the time where the breakdown tends to happen. But what sales tech is introducing is unprecedented transparency, conversation recordings. I have a whole library of them now. I don't need to tell you what happened. Here it is. Right. Here's what happened, right? And so that does two things. The first thing it does is it puts a lot of pressure on sellers to try to navigate these conversations the right way. But it puts a lot of pressure on managers to completely rethink how they're managing their teams, how they're coaching their teams, how they're leading their teams. So, that's ushering in a whole new wave of sellers that crave feedback, managers that really want to get feedback. They're completely rethinking their schedules to provide feedback. And now that we're all inside sellers, there is a big demand for these kinds of tools to rethink how we're interacting with each other as teams. So all these variables combined are creating this cocktail that is potent, that is putting a lot of pressure on the sales profession to rethink how we lead, set expectations, and hold ourselves accountable. And I think that's in the long term going to be a good thing for the profession.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think that I see several things. One is that this is going to help people get sensitized to the fact that as we bring more tech into sales, is that the human aspect of it becomes more important, not less. Because as you bring more technology into it, certain aspects of your selling process are become less differentiated. And so this differentiation is going to come from the humans. I think the other thing where it's putting pressure on, and I like to kid sales tech CEOs when I say this when they come on the show, is like, yeah, we've had this unprecedented wave of sales technology into sales over the last 5-10 years. Yet if you read CSO Insights reports, sales performance B2B is dropping year over year. So thus the correlation must be sales tech makes salespeople stupid, which is not the case. But I think that we still are fundamentally illiterate when it comes to how we use the tools and the information we get from it. And I think that is the big wave. Data literacy is horrible among salespeople. We get this data, and you just have to read some of the vendors out there that put out these reports. We've studied 6 million calls, and you're supposed to do X. And it's like, well, no, that makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, statistically, it's horrible math. I mean, it's just and it's like we're doing ourselves a big disservice if we put that out there and think that it's true. So I think we have this obligation in the profession to increase our data literacy and understand how to use these tools to actually improve performance.
Right. Bringing it back to the nuanced messaging, we have transparency into the voice, the tone, the rhetoric of the customer and I think that's the big difference that didn't exist before in interactions, right? That from the data, I completely agree with you. How do we start spending the same amount of time listening to what our prospects have been telling us and reevaluating that as part of our engagements between our as sellers and managers? That's just as similarly important parallel to the data. But
that'll be another episode that you and I will have to get into on that, because it is one of my passion projects is this whole idea of performance in sales. It's we're good at, I think to some degree, at giving people basic competence in sales, but we are bad at managing performance, and it's across the board. And there's lots of examples of relevant examples that we could learn from that we need to, like even some professional sports teams and how they manage top performers. And then understanding really productivity in sales, because I think that that boils down into a lot of other facets of selling. And we don't have a standard definition of what productivity means. And I think this is as we come, hopefully, this is, as you said, as we rethink our processes and rethink everything, this has got to be one of the things we really have to tackle, is really understanding what this means in sales. And again, whole nother conversation we can have on that. But yeah. Well, Dan, unfortunately, we've got to jump, but this has been fantastic. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I have a feling you and I could talk for hours, especially about theater warm-up exercises.
Well, no, I have a pretty limited repertoire of those, but I am a theater aficionado. I love theater. So one of the great things about being here in New York.
I bet. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll look forward to talking again soon.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, folks, thanks for listening. We are so grateful for your support of this show. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. You can do that all on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this podcast is over. We would certainly appreciate your support. So thank you so much. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.